I watched through my kitchen window as the logging truck backed into my driveway, its diesel engine rumbling through the quiet Thursday morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and felt satisfied knowing I'd be fully stocked for winter. What I didn't expect was the white Lexus SUV that came screeching around the corner 30 seconds later, blocking the truck's exit before the driver could even drop the tailgate. My name is Zachary Dawson, and I'd been living in the Meadowbrook Estates development for 8 years. I owned a 12-acre property on the edge of the HOA boundaries, technically part of their jurisdiction but far enough from the cookie-cutter houses that I usually got left alone. I ran a small woodworking business from my barn and heated my workshop and home exclusively with wood stoves. Every fall, I ordered a massive delivery of seasoned oak and maple, and every winter, I donated about a third of my supply to the community warming center downtown where my sister volunteered. But apparently, that routine was about to change. The woman who stepped out of the Lexus wore cream-colored pants that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill and a blazer that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive bob that somehow always accompanied entitlement, and her heels clicked against my asphalt driveway like little hammers of fury. I pulled on my work boots and headed outside, already feeling my jaw tighten. The truck driver, a grizzled guy named Pete who'd been delivering to me for years, stood with his hands on his hips, clearly confused. "I'm sorry, madam, but I need to unload this wood and get moving," Pete was saying as I approached. "I've got 3 more deliveries today." "This delivery is in violation of Meadowbrook Estates HOA regulations, Section 7, Subsection 3, the woman declared, waving a leather-bound folder like it was a holy text. "No commercial vehicles over 15 feet in length are permitted on residential driveways during weekday hours between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. "Karen," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. I'd learned her name was actually Karen Hutchins about 3 years ago when she first got elected to the HOA board, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. "This is my property, and I'm receiving a delivery. The truck will be gone in 20 minutes. Karen turned to face me, her expression a mixture of smugness and practiced concern. "Zachary, the rules exist for everyone's benefit. Your property may be larger than others, but you still signed the HOA covenant when you purchased. Commercial vehicles disrupt the aesthetic harmony of our community." "The aesthetic harmony," I repeated slowly. "My house is a quarter-mile from the nearest neighbor. Who exactly is being disrupted? The principle matters," she insisted. "If we make exceptions for you, then everyone will want exceptions. Besides, this truck is creating exhaust pollution and noise pollution. I've already received complaints." "From who? You just got here." She clutched her folder tighter. "I don't have to reveal my sources. The HOA board has granted me authority to enforce violations as I see them." Pete looked at me with an expression that clearly said he didn't get paid enough for this nonsense. "Listen, buddy, I don't want trouble. Should I come back another time?" "No," I said firmly. "Karen, move your vehicle. This delivery is happening." "I will not. And if you proceed, I'll have no choice but to levy a fine against you. $500 for the first offense, and we'll add towing fees if this truck doesn't leave immediately." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I'd dealt with Karen's power trips before, minor things about my workshop lights being visible after 10 p.m. or my truck being parked at the wrong angle in my own driveway. But this was different. This was my livelihood and my heating source for the winter. "You can't tow a vehicle from my private driveway," I said, keeping my voice level. "That's not how any of this works. We'll see what the police say." She pulled out her phone with a triumphant expression. Go ahead and call them, I said, because I'm calling my lawyer. That made her pause, but only for a second. She dialed, then put on her sweetest voice. Yes, hello, I need to report a commercial vehicle blocking traffic in Meadowbrook Estates. It's creating a safety hazard. I pulled out my own phone and texted my buddy Marcus, who happened to be an attorney specializing in property law. Within seconds, he replied, "Don't let her bully you. Private delivery on private property. She has no authority." When the police cruiser rolled up 15 minutes later, both Karen and I were standing in a silent standoff while Pete sat in his truck cab, probably regretting his career choices. Officer Bradley stepped out, a middle-aged cop I'd actually met at a few community events. He looked between us and sighed. "What's going on here, folks?" Karen immediately launched into her explanation, complete with hand gestures and references to HOA bylaws. Officer Bradley listened politely, then turned to me. "Zachary, this your delivery?" "Yes, sir. Firewood for the winter." "Same delivery I get every year." He walked around the truck, checked that it wasn't blocking any public street, then came back. "Madam, this vehicle is entirely on private property and isn't obstructing any public throughway. The homeowner has every right to receive deliveries." But the HOA regulations clearly state, HOA regulations don't supersede a homeowner's right to use their property for legal purposes, Officer Bradley said, his tone patient but firm. "If you have a civil dispute about covenant violations, that's a matter for the courts, not law enforcement. Now, I'm going to ask you to move your vehicle so this gentleman can complete his work." Karen's face turned an impressive shade of red. "This is outrageous. I will be filing a formal complaint against you, officer." "That's your right, madam. But right now, you need to move your vehicle." She stomped back to her Lexus, fired up the engine, and peeled out with enough force to leave rubber marks on my driveway. Officer Bradley shook his head and gave me an apologetic look. "Good luck with that one," he said. "Thanks for coming out." "Just doing my job. Have a good day, Zachary." Pete finally got to work, and we spent the next hour stacking the wood in my covered storage area behind the barn. It was good quality stuff, well-seasoned oak and maple that would burn clean and hot. I'd probably use about 4 cords myself over the winter, and I'd planned to donate 2 cords to the warming center like I did every year. The warming center, called Hope Haven, served the homeless population and low-income families in Cedar Rapids. My sister Valerie worked there as a volunteer coordinator, and she'd once mentioned they spent nearly $8,000 each winter on heating costs. That's when I started donating wood. They had an old wood-burning furnace in the basement that could supplement their gas heat, and my donations saved them a couple $1,000s annually. But as I stacked the last of the logs, I couldn't stop thinking about Karen's smug face. The entitlement. The power trip. And I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Inside was a formal violation notice, complete with grainy photos of Pete's truck in my driveway and a fine schedule. $500 for the unauthorized commercial vehicle, plus an additional $250 for failure to comply with HOA representative directives. I called Marcus immediately. "They can't actually enforce this, right?" I asked, staring at the letter. "Depends on what your covenant says," Marcus replied. I could hear him typing on his computer. "Email me a copy of your HOA documents and this violation notice. Let me review it." I scanned everything and sent it over. Marcus called back 2 hours later. "Okay, so here's the thing," he said. "Your covenant does have language about commercial vehicles, but it's specifically about vehicles being parked or stored on the property. A temporary delivery doesn't fall under that definition." And even if it did, the fine structure they're trying to impose exceeds the maximum penalties outlined in your covenant. So I can ignore this. You should respond formally. I'll draft a letter explaining why the fine is invalid and that you won't be paying it. But Zachary, I need to warn you, people like this HOA president don't usually back down easily. This might escalate. Let it escalate. I'm not paying a bogus fine for receiving firewood. Marcus sent me the letter, which I promptly mailed to the HOA board. I thought that would be the end of it, or at least a pause while they consulted their own lawyer. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I came home from a job site to find a bright orange sticker plastered on my front door. It declared my property in violation of multiple HOA regulations and threatened daily accumulating fines. According to the sticker, my workshop barn was not an approved structure per the Architectural Review Committee. My firewood storage was visible from the street, creating aesthetic degradation. And my pickup truck counted as a commercial vehicle that couldn't be parked in view of other properties. I stood there in the fading November light, feeling my blood pressure rise. Every single one of these violations had existed for 8 years. The barn had been here when I bought the place. The firewood storage was in the same spot it had always been. And my truck was just a regular Ford F-250 with my business name on the door, parked in my own driveway like it had been for nearly a decade. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I took photos of the sticker, peeled it off, and called Marcus again. "She's harassing you," Marcus said after I explained. "This is clearly retaliatory action. We could probably get a restraining order, but that's going to cost you. The cheaper option is to fight this through the HOA's internal dispute resolution process, then take it to small claims court if needed." How long would that take? Months. Maybe longer. I thanked Marcus and hung up, feeling frustrated. Then I noticed Valerie's car pulling up my driveway. She'd mentioned stopping by to grab some preserves I'd made from my apple trees. "Hey," she called, getting out with a couple of empty jars. "You look thrilled to see me." "Just HOA drama," I said, gesturing at the wadded-up orange sticker in my hand. She made a sympathetic face. Valerie was 2 years younger than me, worked as a social worker, and volunteered at Hope Haven every weekend. She'd been the one to first tell me about their heating costs and how much the wood donations helped. "Let me guess, Karen Hutchins." "Who else?" She followed me inside, and I poured us both coffee while venting about the whole situation. Valerie listened, her expression growing more concerned. "That's incredibly petty," she said. "But hey, speaking of Hope Haven, I was going to ask if you'd be able to do the wood donation earlier this year. We're expecting a brutal winter, and the forecast says we might get hit with cold snaps starting in December." I hesitated, thinking about Karen's vendetta. "How much were you hoping for?" "Whatever you can spare. Even a cord would help tremendously." I should have said yes immediately. I'd always said yes before, but something stubborn and angry rose up in my chest. Why should I donate anything when Karen was trying to bleed me dry with bogus fines? Why should I help the community when the community's representative was actively harassing me? "I need to think about it," I said. Valerie gave me a strange look. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just dealing with a lot right now." She didn't push it, but I could tell she was puzzled. After she left with her jars of apple butter, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the violation notice and the orange sticker. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for that Thursday evening. I decided to attend and confront this head-on. Meadowbrook Estates held their monthly meetings in the community clubhouse, a fancy building with a gym and a pool that I never used despite paying mandatory HOA fees for its upkeep. When I arrived at 7 p.m., About 20 other homeowners were scattered around the meeting room, most looking bored. Karen sat at the front table with 4 other board members. A retired dentist named Paul, a real estate agent named Susan, a younger guy who worked in tech named Brian, and an older woman named Margaret who seemed perpetually confused about what was happening. "All right, let's call this meeting to order," Karen announced, banging a gavel like she was a judge. "First order of business, approval of last month's minutes." I sat through 15 minutes of mind-numbing discussion about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Finally, they moved to new business. "We have several outstanding violations that need to be addressed," Karen said, pulling out a folder. My folder, I realized. One property owner has repeatedly refused to comply with covenant regulations and has shown flagrant disregard for community standards. "Are you talking about me?" I asked loudly from my seat in the back. Every head turned. Karen's expression flickered between annoyance and satisfaction. "Mr. Dawson, there will be a time for homeowner comments at the end of the meeting." "No, we're doing this now," I said, standing up and walking to the front. "You're talking about my property, so I have a right to address it immediately." Paul, the retired dentist, cleared his throat. "Actually, Karen, he's right. If we're discussing a specific property owner's violations, they should have a chance to respond." Karen's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. Mr. Dawson, you have the floor." I pulled out my phone and brought up the photos I'd taken. "Last week, I received a legitimate firewood delivery on my private property. Karen physically blocked the delivery truck and called the police, trying to claim I was violating HOA regulations. The police officer confirmed I had every right to receive the delivery. Now I'm receiving bogus violation notices as retaliation." "They're not bogus," Karen interjected. "Your property has multiple ongoing violations that have been documented for 8 years. I cut her off. "My barn has been there since before I bought the property. My firewood storage is in the same location it's always been. My truck is a standard pickup that I use for work. None of this is new and none of it violates the actual language of our covenant." Susan, the real estate agent, flipped through her own folder. "Karen, do we have documentation of when these violations were first noted?" "The date doesn't matter. Violations are violations." "Actually, it does matter," Brian, the tech guy, spoke up. "If structures existed before someone purchased, they're usually grandfathered in. And we can't selectively enforce rules that's legally problematic." I could have kissed Brian right then. Karen's face was getting redder. "The covenant clearly states that all structures must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Mr. Dawson never submitted his barn for approval." "Because it was already here," I said. "The previous owner built it in 2009. I have the permits from the county showing it's a legal structure." Margaret, the older woman, raised her hand tentatively. "I'm confused. Why are we suddenly concerned about Zachary's property?" "He's been a good neighbor for years." "Because he refused to comply with a lawful directive from an HOA representative," Karen snapped. "No, I refuse to let you bully me into canceling a legitimate delivery," I corrected. "And now you're abusing your position to harass me with made-up violations and excessive fines." The room was dead silent. Several other homeowners were watching with interest now, a few nodding along with my words. Paul cleared his throat again. "I think we need to table this discussion and have our HOA attorney review the situation. Karen, did you consult with legal counsel before issuing these violation notices?" "I don't need to consult an attorney to enforce our own rules." "Actually, you do," Susan said, her tone careful. "Especially when issuing fines. We need to make sure we're following proper procedures." Karen gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. Fine, we'll table this, but I want it on record that Mr. Dawson's property is in clear violation of community standards. Noted, Paul said, though his tone suggested he didn't agree. Anything else for new business? The meeting wrapped up shortly after. As people filed out, several homeowners stopped to tell me they supported me or had their own Karen horror stories. Brian pulled me aside in the parking lot. "Hey man, just so you know, a bunch of us have been getting frustrated with Karen's power trips," he said quietly. "She's been president for 3 years and it's gotten worse every year. Elections are coming up in March. You should consider running against her." I don't know anything about running an HOA. Neither does she, but that hasn't stopped her from making everyone miserable. Just think about it. I drove home feeling slightly better. At least some board members seemed reasonable. Maybe this would blow over, but Karen wasn't done. On Saturday morning, I woke up to find a formal letter from the HOA's law firm. It outlined all of Karen's alleged violations, added a few new ones I'd never heard of, and declared that if I didn't pay the outstanding fines within 30 days and remedy all violations, the HOA would place a lien on my property. A lien on my property over a firewood delivery. I called Marcus immediately, not caring that it was 8 a.m. on a weekend. "They're threatening a lien," I told him after he groggily answered. "Forward me the letter." I did, then waited while Marcus woke up and read through it. He called back 20 minutes later, sounding more alert and considerably angrier. "Okay, this is beyond normal HOA overreach. This is harassment, and frankly, I think their attorney is either incompetent or wasn't given the full story. A lot of these violations don't meet the threshold for lien-worthy offenses under Iowa law. So, what do I do? I'm going to draft a response explaining why their claims are invalid and warning them that continued harassment will result in a lawsuit for damages. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction with Karen, every letter, every violation notice. We might need it. This is insane." "Yeah, well, HOAs bring out the worst in some people. Hang in there." I spent the rest of the weekend in a foul mood, splitting wood with more force than necessary. Every swing of the axe was accompanied by thoughts of Karen's self-righteous expression. By Sunday evening, my wood pile was immaculately organized and I'd worked off some anger, but I still felt a gnawing frustration. That's when Valerie called. "Hey, I hate to bug you, but I'm finalizing the winter supply orders for Hope Haven," she said. "Can I put you down for 2 cords like usual?" I stared at my neatly stacked wood, thinking about the thousands of dollars in legal fees I might have to spend fighting Karen's vindictive crusade. "I don't think I can donate this year," I said, silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Is this about the HOA thing?" "It's about a lot of things. Zachary, the people at Hope Haven have nothing to do with your HOA dispute. There are families and elderly folks who depend on—" "I know what they depend on," I interrupted. "But I'm dealing with potential liens on my property and legal fees, all because some HOA tyrant decided to make my life hell. I can't afford to give away $2,000 worth of firewood right now." More silence. When Valerie spoke again, her voice was tight. $2,000. "You always told me you got the wood for cost, that it was like $600 per cord." "It is, but that's still $1,200 plus the labor of splitting and delivering it. And right now, with everything going on, fine. I get it. You're stressed. But you're punishing people who have nothing to do with your situation." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not giving away free resources when I'm being attacked." "Right. Well, thanks for letting me know." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, feeling guilty and defensive at the same time. Valerie didn't understand. She wasn't the one dealing with Karen's harassment. December arrived with a vengeance. The temperatures dropped into the teens, and a snowstorm dumped 8 inches on Cedar Rapids in one night. I kept my wood stoves burning around the clock, grateful for the warmth while I worked on custom furniture orders in my barn. Marcus sent his response letter to the HOA's attorney, and we waited. A week passed with no response. Then 2 weeks. I started to think maybe they'd realized their case was bogus and backed off. Then I got the call from Valerie. "They're closing Hope Haven," she said without preamble. "What?" The board met yesterday. Between the increased heating costs and some funding cuts, they can't afford to keep the warming center open through February and March. They're shutting down at the end of January. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. That's 2 months early. Yeah, 2 months when the weather is at its worst. Do you have any idea how many people rely on that center? Her voice cracked. We have elderly folks who come in during the day because they can't afford to heat their apartments. Homeless people who use it as a safe place. Families with kids. I'm sorry, Val, but I don't see what I can do. You could donate the firewood like you always do. It would save them enough on heating costs to stay open. I already told you I can't afford it this year. Can't or won't. That's not fair. What's not fair is letting vulnerable people suffer because you're in a pissing match with your HOA president. I wanted to argue, to make her understand that this was about principle, about not letting people like Karen win through intimidation. But Valerie had already hung up. I tried to focus on my work, on the custom dining table I was building for a client in Iowa City. But Valerie's words kept echoing. The image of families and elderly people trying to stay warm kept intruding on my thoughts. It wasn't my responsibility, I told myself. Hope Haven had been operating before I started donating. They'd figure something out. 2 days before Christmas, I drove into town for supplies and passed by Hope Haven. There was a line of people outside despite the bitter cold, waiting for the doors to open. I recognized a few faces from previous years when I dropped off firewood. An older woman with a walker. A young mother with 2 small kids bundled in inadequate coats. A veteran I'd chatted with once who'd fallen on hard times. I drove past quickly, not wanting to make eye contact. Christmas came and went quietly. Valerie didn't call, and when I tried reaching out, she responded with short, polite texts. We'd never had a serious fight before, and the distance felt wrong on New Year's Day. I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that my appeal of the violations had been denied by the board. The fines were upheld, and I had 15 days to pay, or they would proceed with placing a lien on my property. Marcus called an hour after I forwarded him the letter. "They're not backing down," he said. And unfortunately, they can technically place a lien even for disputed fines. You'd have to take them to court to have it removed, which means legal fees and time. So I'm just screwed, not necessarily. I've been doing some research, and I think Karen Hutchins has been exceeding her authority in several ways. If we can prove she's been acting outside the scope of her position, and that the board hasn't been properly informed or involved, we can argue that these fines are invalid and potentially get her removed from the board. How do we prove that? We need documentation. Other homeowners she's harassed, board meeting minutes, anything showing a pattern of abuse of power. I thought about Brian's comment at the meeting about other people being frustrated with Karen. I might be able to get that. Over the next week, I quietly reached out to neighbors I'd spoken with at the HOA meeting. It turned out Brian wasn't exaggerating. Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. She'd fined one family for having the wrong shade of mailbox. She'd reported another neighbor to the city for a fence that was 3 inches too tall, even though it had been approved by the previous HOA board. She tried to ban basketball hoops in driveways, claiming they were unsightly. Everyone had stories, but most people were afraid to fight back because Karen was vindictive and would make their lives miserable. "She needs to be stopped," said Jennifer, a neighbor who lived about a half-mile from me. "But who's going to do it? She's got the rest of the board intimidated." "Not all of them," I said, thinking of Brian and Paul. "Some of them pushed back at the last meeting. Then maybe it's time for more people to start showing up to meetings and making noise." That gave me an idea. The January board meeting was scheduled for the 15th. If I could get a bunch of fed-up homeowners to show up and voice their concerns, maybe we could pressure the board to rein Karen in or even remove her. I spent the next week making calls and sending emails. By the time the meeting rolled around, I had commitments from at least 15 people to attend. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. Karen looked startled when she walked in and saw the crowd. Her eyes narrowed when they landed on me. "Well, this is quite a turnout," she said, taking her seat at the front table. "I hope everyone signed in on the attendance sheet." The meeting started with the usual procedural items, but the energy in the room was different. People were restless, waiting for their chance to speak. When they finally reached homeowner comments, Jennifer stood up first. "I want to address the board's selective enforcement of HOA rules," she said clearly. "I've been fined multiple times for minor infractions, while other properties with identical issues are ignored. It seems like enforcement depends on whether or not Karen personally likes you." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen bristled. "That's a baseless accusation. All violations are handled consistently according to our bylaws." "Really?" Another neighbor, Tom, stood up. "Because you fined me for parking my boat in my driveway for 3 days while I winterized it. But the house 2 streets over has had a boat parked for 6 months with no violation notice." More people started speaking up, sharing their own stories of selective enforcement and harassment. Paul and Susan exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even Margaret looked troubled. "This is getting out of hand," Karen said loudly. "If people have specific complaints, they need to follow proper procedures and submit them in writing." "We did," I said, standing up. "I've submitted multiple appeals and letters from my attorney explaining why your violation notices are baseless. You've ignored all of them and continue to threaten me with liens and fines. Because you're in violation of rules that don't exist or don't apply. You made up half of these violations as retaliation because I wouldn't let you stop my firewood delivery." The room erupted in side conversations. Karen banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will have order." Paul stood up, his expression grave. "Karen, I think we need to have an executive session to discuss this situation. There are clearly concerns about how enforcement is being handled." "I don't answer to people who refuse to follow rules," Karen shot back. "You answer to this board," Brian said firmly. "And right now, the board is hearing serious allegations about your conduct. We need to address them." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Karen's face. She looked around the table, finding no support. Even Margaret was nodding along with Brian's words. "Fine," Karen said icily. "Let's take this to executive session. Everyone except board members, please clear the room." We filed out into the cold January night. People clustered in the parking lot, too invested now to just go home. "Think they'll actually do anything?" Tom asked. "They have to," Jennifer said. "There are too many people complaining now. They can't just ignore it." We waited for 45 minutes, stamping our feet and sharing stories. Finally, Paul came out. "We'd like everyone to come back in, please." We crowded back into the meeting room. Karen sat at the table looking like she'd been sucking on lemons. Paul remained standing. The board has voted to suspend all pending violation fines until we can conduct a comprehensive review of our enforcement procedures, he announced. We'll be hiring an independent consultant to audit our violation records and ensure we're applying rules consistently and fairly. Additionally, we're implementing a new appeals process that will require a majority board vote to uphold any fine over $200. Relief flooded through me. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. Furthermore, Paul continued, we're moving up our board elections to February. Anyone interested in running for a position can submit their name by the end of the month. Karen stood abruptly. This is a coup. You're all conspiring against me because you're too weak to enforce the rules. Karen, sit down, Susan said quietly. I will not. I've dedicated years to this community, trying to maintain standards and property values while all of you— Karen, Paul said more forcefully. Enough. The board has voted. If you can't accept that, you're welcome to resign your position. Karen grabbed her folder and purse. You'll regret this, all of you. She stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Others joined in, and soon there was genuine applause. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. After the meeting, Brian approached me in the parking lot. You should run for president. I'm not qualified. You're as qualified as Karen was, and you'd actually listen to people. Think about it. I drove home feeling a complex mixture of relief and exhaustion. The HOA situation was finally moving in the right direction, but I couldn't shake the guilt about Hope Haven and the rift with Valerie. The next morning, I made a decision. I loaded up 2 cords of firewood into my truck, making multiple trips to haul it all to Hope Haven. Valerie's car was in the parking lot when I arrived with the first load. She came out as I was stacking wood in their storage area behind the building. Zachary, she said quietly. I should have done this weeks ago, I told her, not stopping my work. I was angry and stubborn, and I took it out on people who didn't deserve it. You were dealing with a lot. That's not an excuse. You were right, I was punishing people who had nothing to do with my HOA problems. Valerie helped me unstack and restack the wood properly. We worked in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that exists between siblings who know each other well. The board is meeting this afternoon, she finally said. I told them you might be donating, but they're not sure it's enough to change their minds about closing early. How much would it take to keep them open through March? About $3,000 to cover the shortfall. I did some quick math in my head. The firewood would save them around $1,500. I had some money saved, though using it would hurt. I'll write a check for the rest, I said. Valerie stopped working and stared at me. Zachary, you don't have to. Yeah, I do. I've been selfish and petty, and people could have gotten hurt because of it. Let me fix this. She hugged me tightly. Thank you. We finished unloading the wood, and I wrote a check for $1,500. It would mean tightening my budget for a few months, but it was the right thing to do. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The HOA situation was still messy, but at least I'd done something good. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The HOA's audit revealed what we all suspected: Karen had been selectively enforcing rules, making up violations, and exceeding her authority in multiple ways. Several of her fines were invalidated, including all of mine. She resigned from the board in early February rather than face a vote of no confidence. I ended up running for HOA president, mostly because Brian and Jennifer kept pestering me about it. To my surprise, I won by a comfortable margin. My platform was simple: enforce rules fairly, communicate clearly, and stop treating homeowners like criminals. My first act as president was to rewrite the violation and fine structure to include mandatory warnings, a transparent appeals process, and caps on fines. My second act was to formally apologize to all the homeowners who'd been unfairly targeted under the previous administration. Karen moved out of Meadowbrook Estates in March. Rumor had it, she joined another HOA board in a development across town. I felt sorry for those people. Hope Haven stayed open through March and into April, serving hundreds of people during one of the coldest winters in recent history. Valerie told me that the firewood and my donation had made all the difference. In May, I received a letter from Hope Haven's board of directors, thanking me for my continued support and asking if I'd be willing to join their advisory committee. I said yes. Looking back, I realized the whole situation had taught me something important. It's easy to let anger and pride cloud your judgment. It's easy to justify hurting others when you feel you've been wronged. But at the end of the day, there's a difference between standing up for yourself and letting vindictiveness guide your actions. Karen had let power and control consume her, turning into the kind of person who measured worth by her ability to punish others. I'd almost gone down a similar path, letting my anger at her spill over into hurting innocent people. The Firewood situation had been a wake-up call. Karen had blocked my delivery, trying to exert dominance and control. In response, I'd blocked my donation to the warming center, exerting my own form of control. Neither action had been about principle, both had been about ego. One Saturday morning in late May, I was splitting wood for next winter when a car pulled up my driveway. I didn't recognize the vehicle, a modest Honda sedan with a few rust spots. An older man stepped out, probably in his 70s, wearing a worn jacket and a Vietnam veteran baseball cap. It took me a moment to recognize him as one of the regular visitors to Hope Haven. "Mr. Dawson," he asked tentatively. "That's me. Can I help you? I'm Robert Chen. I don't know if you remember me, but we talked once last year when you were dropping off wood at the center." I did remember him vaguely. He'd told me about his time in the service and his struggle to make ends meet on a fixed income. "Sure, I remember. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to thank you," he said simply. "My apartment building had heating problems all winter. Landlord wouldn't fix them properly. If Hope Haven had closed down like they were planning, I don't know what I would have done. Your donation kept them open." I felt a lump in my throat. I was just doing what I should have done from the start. "Still matters," Robert said. "There were a lot of us who depended on that place. You made a difference." After he left, I sat on my porch for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences. If I'd stuck with my decision not to donate, people like Robert would have suffered. Not because of anything they'd done, but because I'd been too caught up in my own problems to see beyond them. The HOA presidency kept me busy through the summer. We implemented new systems, improved communication, and slowly rebuilt trust in the community. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was satisfying in its own way. In August, Jennifer organized a community barbecue at the clubhouse. It was the first social event we'd had in years that felt genuinely friendly rather than obligatory. People actually talked to each other. Kids ran around playing and there was laughter. Paul, who'd stayed on as treasurer, clinked a beer bottle against mine. "You've done a good job with this place. It actually feels like a community again." "We've all done a good job," I corrected. "Turns out when you treat people with respect and don't act like a tyrant, things work better," he laughed. Novel concept. Valerie showed up halfway through the barbecue with her new boyfriend, a teacher named Mike who seemed nice enough. She gave me a hug and whispered, "Proud of you. For not being a jerk anymore, for learning from your mistakes. Not everyone does." As fall approached and I prepared to order my annual firewood delivery, I called Pete, the truck driver, to schedule it. "You're not going to have any problems with your HOA this year, are you?" he asked, only half joking. "Nope, I am the HOA now," he laughed. "Good for you. Same amount as last year." I thought about it. "Actually, make it 8 cords. I want to donate 3 to Hope Haven this year." "You got it." The delivery went smoothly in mid-October. No blocked driveways, no police calls, no violation notices. Just Pete backing up his truck, dropping the wood, and moving on with his day like it was the most normal thing in the world. Because it was. I spent the next few weeks splitting and stacking, enjoying the physical work and the steady progress. When I delivered 3 full cords to Hope Haven in early November, Valerie and the center's director were there to meet me. "This is incredibly generous," the director said. "We can't thank you enough." "Just trying to do the right thing," I told her. That winter was milder than the previous one, but Hope Haven still served hundreds of people. The wood I donated helped keep their costs down and their doors open. In March, when HOA elections came around again, I ran unopposed and was re-elected. Apparently, not being a power-hungry tyrant was a low enough bar that people appreciated it. Karen's name came up occasionally in neighborhood gossip. She'd apparently lasted only 4 months on her new HOA board before getting voted out. Last anyone heard, she'd moved to a condo with no HOA at all. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As for me, I kept running my woodworking business, managing the HOA with as much fairness and common sense as I could muster, and donating firewood to Hope Haven every year. It became a routine again, but this time I understood what it meant. It wasn't about charity or tax deductions, or feeling good about myself. It was about being part of a community and recognizing that my actions affected people beyond myself. Karen had forgotten that, if she'd ever known it. She'd seen her HOA position as a source of power rather than a responsibility. I'd almost made the same mistake from the other direction, wielding my resources, or withholding them as a weapon in a personal dispute. The difference between us, I hoped, was that I'd caught myself before it was too late. One evening in early April, about 18 months after the whole mess started, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over my property. The wood stoves were finally off for the season, the barn was organized, and I had a backlog of furniture orders that would keep me busy through the summer. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. "Board meeting tomorrow at 7. Don't forget." I wouldn't forget. Being HOA president meant showing up, staying engaged, and making sure we didn't slide back into the kind of petty tyranny that had defined Karen's tenure. It also meant setting an example. When new homeowners moved into the neighborhood, I made it a point to welcome them personally and let them know that the HOA was there to support the community, not control it. When disputes arose, I focused on mediation rather than punishment. When rules needed enforcement, I made sure it was done consistently and fairly. Was it perfect? No. There were still disagreements and complications. Some people still complained about HOA fees or rules, but there was a fundamental difference: people felt heard. They felt like the HOA worked for them, not against them, and me. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean tearing others down. That principle matters, but so does perspective. That being right isn't as important as being decent. The whole experience with Karen blocking my wood delivery had been frustrating and infuriating. But in a strange way, I was almost grateful for it. If she hadn't pushed things to such an extreme, I might never have gotten involved in the HOA. I might never have learned the lesson about how my personal battles could hurt innocent people. I definitely wouldn't have met Robert Chen and heard directly how the warming center donation mattered. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life continued in its steady rhythm. I ordered my firewood in October, Pete delivered it without incident, and I split and stacked it over the following weeks. When November came, I loaded up 3 cords and delivered them to Hope Haven, where Valerie and the staff greeted me like an old friend. Same time next year. Valerie asked with a smile. Same time next year, I confirmed, because some routines are worth keeping, some responsibilities are worth honoring, and some lessons once learned should never be forgotten. The warming center would stay open all winter, serving people who needed it. My firewood would help, not because I was a hero or a saint, but because I was part of a community. And communities work when people remember that their actions ripple outward, affecting others in ways both seen and unseen. Karen had forgotten that. She'd gotten so caught up in rules and control that she'd lost sight of the people those rules were supposed to serve. And when I'd stopped donating to the warming center, I'd made the same mistake, letting my anger override my responsibility to others. But I'd learned. I'd changed. And now, as I stood in my driveway watching the last of the autumn leaves fall from the oak trees that lined my property, I felt a sense of peace. The firewood was stacked. The HOA was running smoothly. The warming center would stay open. And maybe, just maybe, I'd managed to do something good in the world. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. Sometimes it's enough to recognize your mistakes, make them right, and commit to doing better going forward. The wood stoves would burn through the winter, keeping my home and workshop warm. The donated wood would burn at Hope Haven, keeping vulnerable people safe from the cold. And somewhere across town, Karen was probably finding new battles to fight and new rules to enforce, never learning the lesson that power without compassion is just tyranny with a gavel. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My job was to keep showing up, keep doing the right thing, and keep remembering that communities thrive when people choose cooperation over control. The sun set fully, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I headed inside, made dinner, and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new HOA issues to resolve, new furniture orders to complete. But tonight I was content. The firewood was delivered. The warming center would stay open. And I'd learned something valuable about the kind of person I wanted to be, not perfect, not a hero, just someone who tried to do right by others, even when it wasn't easy or convenient. Someone who recognized that the smallest actions like donating firewood or standing up to HOA abuse could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Karen had blocked my wood delivery, hoping to assert dominance and control. In the end, all she'd done was catalyze change in the HOA, in the community, and in me. And while I wouldn't thank her for it, I could at least acknowledge that sometimes the worst situations teach the best lessons. The wood would keep burning. The community would keep growing. And life, in all its complicated messiness, would keep moving forward. That was enough. That was everything.